Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, all is vanity. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Shalom, Israel. I am Brother Simeon, Israel, and welcome to today's Bible lesson. First and foremost, I'd like to start by giving all praises to the almighty power of my forefathers, the almighty power of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Today's lesson is titled as, Do Israelite Calendars Matter? In today's lesson, we'll take a look at the value of the modern Israelite timekeeping systems. I'll assess the value of the Israelite calendars by looking at the following points today. Firstly, the importance of the Most High's ordinances. Secondly, the Most High's ordinances for the feast days of Israel. And finally, what's actually expected of a righteous Israelite in captivity. The importance of the Most High's ordinances. The definition of the word ordinance, according to the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, is an authoritative decree or direction, that is, an order. Secondly, something ordained or decreed by fate or a deity. So when we speak of the Most High's ordinances, what we are actually referring to are the things ordained or decreed by the Most High. Here is an example of an ordinance of the Most High. In many instances, the Most High is very specific with His decrees. The Most High likes order. In 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 4, we see the following. Behold, I build a house to the name of the Lord my God, to dedicate it to Him, and to burn before Him sweet incense, and for the continual showbread, and for the burnt offerings, morning and evening, on the Sabbaths, and on the new moons, and on the solemn feasts of the Lord our God. This is an ordinance forever to Israel. Indeed, everything must be in a proper place at the proper time. The Most High is strict about order and having everything in its place, not just for the Israelites, but for all His creations. And when these orders are disobeyed, it can have dire consequences. We see this in Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 to 4, reads thus, And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. The people of the earth spoke one language and decided to build a tower as a symbol of their one world order. And they decided to make a name for themselves as one unified, globalized nation on the earth. Continuing at verse 5, And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. The Most High saw the globalist agenda of the people of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and He despised it, knowing that once unified, they can achieve anything they put their collective minds to, perhaps even the deepest thoughts of their wicked imaginations, as they did in the time of Noah. And how do I know that the hearts of men are set to do wickedness continually? We see this in Genesis chapter 3, verses 6 and 22, which reads as follows. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. Our forefather Adam disobeyed the ordinances of the Most High. He failed to do exactly what the Most High told him to do. He was instructed not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but he did. And as a result of Adam's disobedience, man has become as one of the spiritual beings created by the Most High, we now have knowledge to do good and also crave evil. Furthermore, in Genesis chapter 11, verses 7 to 9, we see the following. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they did left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. The Most High never instructed Shem, Ham, and Japheth to form a unified global society. In fact, according to the Hebrew scriptures, the Most High despises the notion. He despises the notion because of Adam's disobedience of his ordinance to not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And because Adam, the progenitor of humanity, disobeyed the Most High's ordinance in the Garden of Eden, a unified, globalized society can lead to much good, where, for example, we combine our knowledge and resources to tackle grave social issues. But it can also lead to the global spread of wicked ideologies created by evil and powerful men. Or our combined knowledge can also lead to even more destructive evil on this earth, all because Adam did not strictly follow the ordinances of the Most High, wherein he was not supposed to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, again highlighting the importance of strictly obeying all of the ordinances of the Most High at all times. So when the Most High says to Israel that you must keep my ordinances, he means the Israelite must follow his ordinances exactly as it is written. And it was written the way it was written for a very good reason. In Leviticus chapter 18 verse 4, we see the following. Ye shall do my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk therein. I am the Lord your God. So what exactly are the Most High's specific ordinances for the feast days of Israel? Here is a summary of the ordinances of the 7 main feast days. I also included the weekly Sabbath commandment and new moon solemn feast day. Here we see where and how the feasts and holy days were observed according to the ordinances given by the Most High. The feasts and holy days must be kept exactly as written. There is no room for improvisation or making your own ordinances to suit your religious doctrine. Also, the weekly Sabbath feast of Leviticus and the weekly Sabbath commandment are not the same, and this was explained in the video lesson entitled, Is the weekly lunar Sabbath doctrine legit? In this lesson, I also exposed the false doctrine of the lunar Sabbath. And the weekly Sabbath commandment must be kept by all Israelites on the 7th day of the week wherever Israel sojourns. The weekly Sabbath is a day of rest from all work. For those in the Americas and the West Indies, this would be a Saturday. This was demonstrated in the video lesson entitled as, Is Saturday the correct weekly Sabbath? Importantly, note that all of the feast days, including the new moons, require a mandatory offering made to the Most High by the Levitical priesthood. Even though there are other different ordinances regarding how different feast days are observed, the fact that they all require a Levitical priest offering to the Lord tells us that none of the feast days can be kept according to the ordinances of the Most High while we are in captivity. Besides the obvious fact that we no longer have a Levitical priesthood, how can I be sure of this? In the King James Version Bible, in Hosea chapter 3, verse 4 to 5, we see the following. For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, and without a prince, and without a sacrifice, and without an image, and without an ephod, and without a teraphim. And afterward shall the children of Israel return, and seek the Lord their God, and David their king, and shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. In the King James Version of the Bible, we see that there would be no sacrifices, that is, sacrificial offerings to the Most High in the latter days. And there are few that would doubt that we are in fact in the latter days. But we also see that Israel would be without the accessories associated with the Levitical priesthood. The context is not clear and is open for interpretation. Let us now look at the Brenton Septuagint for further clarification. In the Brenton Septuagint, Hosea chapter 3 verses 4 to 5 reads as follows: For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, and without a prince, and without a sacrifice, and without an altar, and without a priesthood, and without manifestations. And afterward shall the children of Israel return, and shall seek the Lord their God, and David their king, and shall be amazed at the Lord, and at his goodness in the latter days. Indeed, now it's crystal clear that in the latter days there would be no Levitical priesthood to make offerings to the Most High. Now notice that in the tables there is no column for when the feast days should be kept. The answer for when the feast days should be kept depends on the timekeeping system that is being utilized, and you will find that there are many modern timekeeping systems. In the video lesson entitled "Is Saturday the Correct Weekly Sabbath?" I used one of the many modern Israelite timekeeping systems to create a modern visualization of when the weekly Sabbaths are to be kept in captivity. This timekeeping system was based on the new moon and the Abib Bali to mark the beginning of months and years. But the system is by no means the only one in use by Israelites today. But regardless of the Israelite calendar that one uses, you will notice that the weekly Sabbath commandment is still the only holy day on the list that you can keep in captivity according to the ordinances of the Most High. The many timekeeping systems in use today are used separately from the Gregorian calendar to track the holy days of the Most High. And most of these timekeeping systems assign different times for the feast days of the Most High, which leads to a lot of gossiping and backbiting within the Israelite congregation. Even the Christians and Hebrew Christianites have their own calendars, some based on the extra biblical books of Enoch and the book of Jubilees, which were both written by the enemies of Israel to cause confusion through the creation of many false doctrines. At this point, you must be asking yourself, besides the weekly Sabbath commandment, which we can and must keep in captivity, what's the point of knowing when the feast days are if we can't keep them according to the ordinances of the Most High while in captivity? The answer is so that we can rehearse or commemorate the righteous acts, and we can use an Israelite timekeeping system to practice keeping the feast days. In Judges chapter 5 verse 11, we see the following: They that are delivered from the noise of archers in the place of drawing water, there shall they rehearse the righteous acts of the Lord, even the righteous acts towards the inhabitants of his villages in Israel. Then shall the people of the Lord go down to the gates. Indeed, this scripture is used by many Israelites and Hebrew Christianites to justify practicing or rehearsing the righteous acts, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. But rehearsing without keeping the feast days according to the exact ordinances of the Most High is not a commandment of the Most High. It is nothing more than Israelite tradition. So the question becomes, does it matter when if we completely ignore how and where the feasts are to be kept? The answer is of course no. It doesn't matter what Israelite calendar you choose to use. Other than the weekly Sabbath commandment, practicing the righteous acts, that is, commemorating the feast days in captivity, is a tradition that you choose to rehearse or practice to the best of your ability. It is not a commandment of the Most High to keep the feast days where and how you feel like it. Therefore, there is no such thing as having the correct Israelite calendar in captivity if you're just using it to commemorate the feast days. Furthermore, Israel lost their heritage during the transatlantic slave trade, where we were scattered to the four corners of the earth in slave ships. The Most High will renew the heritage of the righteous remnant of Israel that will receive salvation from the lands where our ancestors were taken as captives. The remnant of Israel will have a temple in the Holy Land, a high priest, an exact understanding of when and how to keep the feast. We see this in the following third temple prophecy of Ezekiel. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 45, verse 17, we see the following: And it shall be the prince's part to give burnt offerings, and meat offerings, and drink offerings, in the feasts, and in the new moons, and in the Sabbaths, in all solemnities of the house of Israel. He shall prepare the sin offering, and the meat offering, and the burnt offering, and the peace offerings, to make reconciliation for the house of Israel. In addition, in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 25, we see the following. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob, my servant, wherein your fathers have dwelt, and they shall dwell therein, even they, and their children, and their children's children, forever. And my servant David shall be their prince, forever. Our prince David will be resurrected. He will be our high priest after the order of Melchizedek. He will have the knowledge and understanding of making offerings unto the Lord. Our prince will know when these offerings are to be made for the different feast days, and David and the congregation of the remnant of Israel will keep the feast days in the third temple in the Holy Land. With regards to the feast days of the Most High, let us follow the ancient path to see what's actually expected of a righteous Israelite in captivity. In the Apocrypha, in the book of Tobit, chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, we see the following. The book of the words of Tobit, son of Tobiel, the son of Ananiel, the son of Aduel, the son of Gabael, of the seed of Asael, of the tribe of Naphtali, who in the time of Enemessar, king of the Assyrians, was led captive out of Tesbe, which is at the right hand of that city, which is called properly Naphtali, in Galilee, above Aser. I, Tobit, have walked all the days of my life in the ways of truth and justice, and I did many alms deeds to my brethren and to my nation, who came with me to Nineveh, into the land of the Assyrians. Tobit was a righteous Israelite of the tribe of Naphtali. Along with his brethren, he was taken into captivity to Nineveh, in the land of the Assyrians. Continuing at verse 4. And when I was in mine own country, in the land of Israel, being but young, all the tribe of Naphtali of my father fell from the house of Jerusalem, which was chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, that all the tribes should sacrifice there, where the temple of the habitation of the Most High was consecrated and built for all ages. Now, all the tribes which together revolted, and the house of my father Naphtali sacrificed unto the heifer Baal. But I alone went often to Jerusalem at the feast, as it was ordained unto all the people of Israel by an everlasting decree, having the first fruits and tenths of increase, with that which was first shorn, and them gave I at the altar to the priests, the children of Aaron. Indeed, Tobit was a good seed among his brethren of the tribe of Naphtali. While in the Holy Land, all of his brethren started worshipping a false god and idol, but Tobit continued to worship the Most High only, and strictly followed the ordinances of the Most High regarding the feast days. Continuing at verse 19. And when one of the Ninevites went and complained of me to the king, that I buried them, and hid myself, understanding that I was sought for to be put to death, I withdrew myself for fear. Then all my goods were forcibly taken away, neither was there anything left me, beside my wife Anna, and my son Tobias. After being falsely accused while in captivity, something I'm sure many Israelites hearing my voice can identify with, Tobit had everything taken away from him except his family, and he hid himself, fearing that he would be put to death. Moreover, Tobit chapter 2 verses 1 to 2 reads as follows. Now when I was come home again, and my wife Anna was restored unto me, with my son Tobias, in the feast of Pentecost, which is the holy feast of the 7 weeks, there was a good dinner prepared me, in the which I sat down to eat. And when I saw abundance of meat, I said to my son, Go and bring what poor man soever thou shalt find out of our brethren, who is mindful of the Lord, and lo, I tarry for thee. Despite being in captivity outside of his homeland, and far away from Jerusalem, Tobit still rehearsed the righteous acts. He could not keep the feast of Pentecost according to all the ordinances of the Most High, but he commemorated the feast day by having a simple feast with his family, and he even invited a fellow poor Israelite who worshipped and feared the Most High only and kept his commandments. This is how a righteous Israelite remains mindful of the Most High while living in the lands where their ancestors were taken captive. You commemorate the feast days, even though you are not able to keep the feasts according to the correct ordinances, and no one can or should judge you for rehearsing the righteous acts to the best of your knowledge and ability, no matter what Israelite calendar you choose to use or how you choose to use it. In conclusion, in keeping the feast days, all the ordinances of the Most High must be strictly followed to the letter. It is not a commandment of the Most High to conveniently pick and choose ordinances for the sake of tradition. Therefore, when is of no greater importance than where and how the feast days are to be kept according to the Most High's strict ordinances. However, just like our ancient ancestors, you can honor the Most High by rehearsing the righteous acts in captivity. But in captivity, we totally lost our heritage, and our holy scriptures were corrupted by our enemies, which is leading to the development of many different doctrines and Israelite timekeeping systems. Nevertheless, the Israelite calendar you choose is of no importance while in captivity outside of Zion, if you're just using this calendar to time the rehearsal of the righteous acts while in captivity. The Most High knows your heart and whether you are sincerely trying to honor Him, and no man could judge you based on what calendar you choose to follow in captivity. And finally, the righteous remnant that fear the Most High and keep His commandments will be led by their prince, David, in accurately keeping the feast days once we return to Zion.